This is the Valley Run Podcast from the ministry of Rocky Mountain Church in Estes Park, Colorado. Whether you're making your valley run for groceries, kids' games, or just need to get out of town, we pray today's message encourages you to elevate your awe for Christ in all things. Online at RockyMountainChurch.com. Here's your host, Pastor A.J. Dudek.
Welcome to another episode of the Valley Run Podcast. Pastor A.J. here today, and I am excited to have on Dr. Dennis Episcopo. Dr. Episcopo has served in pastoral ministry for over 40 years and has a lot of experience working with churches, business leaders around this idea of visionary leadership. What does it look like to be a visionary leader? How do we define it? What are the challenges? What are the wins? Pastor Episcopo completed degrees at the University of Massachusetts, Alliance Theological Seminary, and got his doctorate right here in Colorado at Denver Seminary. He's pastored a variety of churches, big and small, and he currently serves full-time as pastor emeritus at Alliance Church. He spends most of his time encouraging the next generation of leaders stateside and globally through the process of visionary leadership. And he's been happily married to Judy for over 40 years. They have 3 children, 7 grandchildren. He enjoys gardening, playing golf. He's a New York Giants fan. We'll get into that a little bit. But he's also been an NFL chaplain for many years as well. So let's get Dr. Dennis Episcopo on the show. Thanks again for joining us at the Valley Run Podcast. Fondest memory of Colorado, if you've happened to be in Estes Park at all, if you remember that, but Colorado in general, you got New York there, you got Wisconsin. So what's your favorite Colorado memory that you can remember?
Well, I mean, obviously the greatest memory is the scenery.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the views of the mountains, incredible.
Yep.
But that aside, from a personal standpoint, I did my doctoral work at Denver Seminary. And so my favorite memories are the incredible mentors and professors I had, of which the number one mentor that I had there was Gordon MacDonald.
Oh, yeah.
And he's my favorite author. I'm reading, I reread his books all the time. I'm rereading right now, Restoring Your Spiritual Passion. Gordon has had such a great impact on my life from a spiritual standpoint, not just a leadership standpoint, but for soul care.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, that's good insight. That's awesome. So today we're talking about visionary leadership. I've had another guest on. We talked a little bit about how do you manage yourself emotionally as a leader. I know that you've talked about that with the gauges as a leader, but today we're going to talk about visionary leadership. And my first question for you is this, Dennis, what was the first time that you had the opportunity to cast vision in ministry? Do you remember what that was and what you were casting?
Yeah, I really didn't know what I was doing and what visionary leadership was. I hadn't read anything about it, but I was doing it and experiencing it. And it was in my first church, a church of about 50 people. And I went to this church, and it was, it had so many problems, and it didn't have any established ministry, didn't even have a worship service. And my wife had to play piano, and she doesn't really play piano that well. It was, you did everything, the bulletin. And I remember going there and thinking, like, where do I start? I mean, there's so much need here. So I called up my mentor, my pastor at the time, and I said, Pastor, where do I start? I just graduated seminary, had 3 years of training. Yep. And I said, what would you do? And I remember what he told me. He said, I wouldn't do a lot of things. When you go to a church like that, there's no men's group, no women's group. You want to start everything. He said, I would just do a few things, and I would do them well. So I thought, okay. So I went to God. I started praying to God and said, Lord, what do I do here? And I believe God gave me a clear vision for what my time there was supposed to be. And there were 3 things. Number one, the 3 previous pastors had been asked to leave. So they never had a successful, healthy pastoral succession. And so one of the things I believe I was supposed to gift this church with was whenever I did leave, whenever that time was going to happen, it had to be positive. It had to be a good thing. Secondly, there were no leaders there. The two elders that were left didn't even want to be elders. So I believe God wanted me to at least, maybe I had to find them and lead them to Christ and disciple them myself, but I had to leave at least 3 or 4 solid elders behind. And then the third thing was establish basic ministries. And basic ministry for me at that time was a good, solid worship service with good worship and music, solid message, and a basic Sunday school for young children, nursery young children, and maybe an adult class. And that was it. And if I did that in the 5 or 7 years I was going to be there, that would be successful.
That's awesome. So you were kind of thrown into the fire, had good mentorship. You're on the whole other spectrum now. How would you define visionary leadership? What are some of the elements that you are like, these are non-negotiable things?
Yeah. Well, here's how I would define it. And this is my own definition, but it's a picture in a leader's mind, right? That's imparted by God. I really believe that all true vision comes from God. It's the game plan. It's the target on the wall. So it's a picture in your mind imparted by God that is both conceptual and detailed. It's kind of, you have it, you know the general direction, and there's some detail to it, but not a lot.
Yeah.
And it's of a preferable future. It's always involving the future, never about the present, never about the past. So it's something about the future that's in your mind that's imparted by God, and it's both conceptual and detailed.
Yeah, that's a good definition. Did you know you were wired that way coming into pastoral ministry, or do you think that all people are visionary leaders to an extent?
Yes, and I'll say this. I think everyone who is in the leadership chair, particularly in ministry, God is going to give you a vision. It's his church. And he has a future in mind for it. So if the leader understands vision, knows what it is, how to cast it, how to implement it, they will get a clear picture from God of what he's asking that leader to do. 2 things: to be as a church, and to do. Leadership is really about 2 things: being and doing.
Yeah, and I like the idea of giving them a preferable future. No matter where you're at in the present, which in some ministry situations can be dysfunctional, disorganized, and you've got to rise above that and give folks a future trajectory. When you started out, what was your greatest fear in that, Dennis? When you thought about, man, I'm in this first chair, I've got to take this responsibility.
Well, first of all, I really didn't know what I was doing. I had not studied vision. I had not read about vision. Now, I got to tell you, I came upon a book by George Barna called The Power of Vision. It's a very small book, and it's still in print today. I read that book, AJ, and I thought to myself, this is who I am. This is what I do. And this is what vision is. Oh, I understand it now. And it was the first time I really understood what vision is and how to do it. I had intuitively been doing it, but I didn't realize what it was, and that's why I had to study it. But I'm sorry, back to your question. What was your question on that?
Well, when you were in that position those years ago, obviously there's tension there of like, are people going to like this? Are they going to sign on for this? Mm-hmm. Did you remember having those conversations with yourself, wrestling with,
yes,
is this really where we need to go, and all of that? Yes.
Oh, I tell you what, those conversations I had back then, and even to now, I'm not in the first chair anymore. But when I was in the first chair in this church, which had a very large God-sized vision, there were many, many, many times I was out in the parking lot in my car, especially after a tough meeting, and I would say, Lord, I think this is your vision. I'm pretty sure it is. But there was lots of times of doubt. But frankly, as I grew in understanding vision and experiencing vision, those moments of doubt became shorter and shorter, because you'll have those, but then God will flip in your mind all the confirmations He's given you along the way that this is the vision. So it's something. The doubt, I don't know if the doubt ever leaves you. I'm right in the middle right now of probably the biggest vision I've ever been tasked with from God. I'm in the process with another leader of trying to build a really high level Christian academy for students in the Fox cities, and it's going to be triple the amount of money that I spent here in building a $35 million campus. I mean, it's huge. I don't know how we're going to fund it. I don't know how this thing's all going to come about, but it's clear that God has burdened myself and another leader with this vision. So is there doubt? Absolutely. There's always doubt. But you learn to trust God. You learn to just keep following the vision. And that's my advice to people always, is if you sense God is giving you a vision for something, you need to keep walking towards it. Just keep walking towards it. It's His job to confirm it. It's His job to fund it. And if it's His vision, to complete it. Your job is to obey and to follow and to be used as a conduit, maybe even a spokesman for the vision, so to speak. But it's God's vision, and you need to always keep that in view, even during the times of doubt.
No, that's a good word. And I remember sitting in your visionary leadership class at Alliance, 7-8 years ago, and you walked us through kind of the process of casting vision. So let's run a thought experiment here for a second. If you had a young leader come in and they said, hey, Pastor Dennis, help me understand the process. Where do I even begin? I feel like I have this vision. I feel like it's compelling. It is going to give a positive trajectory. It's gospel-centered. It's aligning with the Word of God. Where does this young leader start? If you could give us an idea of process for a second, Dennis, I think that would be helpful for folks listening to this.
I think, AJ, all vision begins with two things: assessment and prayer. So, God does sometimes impart, like Moses to the mountaintop. He just tells you what the vision is. But most of us, it's not like that. Most of us, we get a hold of some data, something that God shows us. So, for example, with Nehemiah, he heard that the walls were there was just rubble, and it burdened him. So he prayed. See, he got some data, he got some information, and he thought about it, and he went to God with it. That's how vision begins. You would kind of assess a situation, and you get some details, and you get a burden with it, and you begin to talk to God about it. So that's where vision always begins. And at some point in this process, you're going to have to write it down. And I get, over the years of 40 years of pastoring, I had plenty of people coming to me saying, I have vision from God. And I'd say, great. Have you written it down? And they go, well, not really. I go, well, write it down and then I'll look at it. They need to sit down and actually try and articulate what they believe God wants them to be and do. So you write it down. Then you communicate it to leadership. Everybody has constituted authority over them.
What do you mean by leadership? Is this your elders, staff? Is this kind of key congregational members? Where do you start there?
If I worked in a company, and I felt like I had a vision for the company or for my department, I go to my supervisor with it. If I'm a pastor in a church, I'm going to the board. If I'm a youth pastor, I'm going to the senior pastor. Whoever is the constituted authority over you, because I believe that God works through constituted authority. So in the case here of our church here, I after about a year, it took me about a year to do the assessment and prayer. And I always advise everybody, because when you go to a church or a new organization, they say, what's the vision? And the leader should say, I need time. I need time to assess the situation and think about it. And so I would say you want to wait at least a year to get the lay of the land and to pray and make sure you've had some good time with the Lord on it. But once you do, you write it down and then you present it to the leadership and you say, what do you think? And that I think that's a check and balance thing. When I came to the vision here, I did that with the leadership. And quite frankly, the main leaders at the time said, we think this is too big, Pastor, and too expensive. And so, AJ, I went off to pray for a week.
Yeah.
I actually rented a motel room in the Twin Cities, and I just took my Bible with me, and I prayed, and I spent time with God. And I did have lunch with one of my mentors there, and he said, Dennis, you need to go back there and just tell those leaders what God has laid on your heart and how you need them to help you. But if they don't want to do this, and they don't see the same vision, then you need to submit to that. And if you can, stay there. But if you can't compromise the vision, you need to ask permission to leave so they can get a pastor in that can bring in their vision.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I did. And the three leading elders said, Pastor, this is too big, too expensive. We don't agree with it, but we do know this. You're supposed to be our pastor. So we will step aside and allow you to build a team of people around you to accomplish this. Now, let me tell you something. That doesn't usually happen. These were very humble men.
No, that seems like.
But I submitted to constituted authority, AJ. If they would have put the brakes on, I would have not gone further.
Yeah, and I had my first experience casting vision at Rocky this last year, a part of a 3-bucket vision cast. I know you and I talked through that a little bit months ago, and God's been really faithful in that. But the process of it was the same for me, as the pastor sitting under their leadership and authority. I needed to know, do these guys have buy-in? Because if they don't, man, we're going to have tension, and that's going to hurt the congregation.
Right.
So in your case, you get the thumbs up, you get the right folks around you that believe in it. When you take it to the congregation, what are some things that you're thinking through and considering?
Yeah, after you've communicated to the leadership, the next step is now you're ready to communicate it to the people. And by the way, that's not a one and done thing. A lot of guys, they say, okay, I'm going to communicate it and boom. But you and I both know vision leaks all over the place. So you need to continually, actually through the whole vision process, you're constantly reminding people what God has called us to be and do in this thing. And so you're communicating the vision. You eventually have to set a launch date. We're going to actually spend some money and do it on this. And then it's all about implementation. You're building the team, you're coming up with a strategic plan, a finance plan, all of that. And then it's just really, it's the bell curve of completing a vision from start to end. You will have a completion time. It's usually at the top of the bell curve. That's when you accomplish it. And then it's a critical moment at that point. And a God-sized vision can take 10, 15, 20, 25 years.
Yes.
And when you get to completion, now you're usually talking about succession. You're usually talking about a new leader and a new vision for the church in the future.
Yep. I want to use your phrase. I want to hit the pause button for a second and ask you a question. To your reference of Nehemiah, we know that there were a couple gentlemen that disagreed with the vision of rebuilding the wall. Right, so you launched this to the congregation. In your experience, how do you absorb folks that are like, yeah, we really don't want to pay the debt off. We don't want to tackle these ministry initiatives. How do you engage with them without them feeling like they're outside of that vision, or hey, now I have to find a new church? Yeah. And I know sometimes that happens. They move on, and I get that. Any advice on those type of conversations, Dennis?
Well, AJ, I wish I could tell you I did it well, but I can't say that. There were some people who just got under my skin, and you have all this pressure on you. You're trying to lead the church towards something that's hard and difficult, that the enemy is going to put all kinds of obstacles in your path. And then you've got friendly fire. You got people from your own church trying to put you down through it. And sometimes it's overwhelming, and I wasn't the most patient person in my younger years. And so I would try and take them on. I probably would not do that today. What I learned was this. I remember reading an article in Leadership Magazine, how when you get opposed by people, that your tendency is to walk away from them or stay away from them, but you actually should walk towards them. And you should try and continue to explain to them why you're doing this. Let them see your motives. Spend some time with them. Listen to their concerns. And you may win them over. And I decided I'm going to do that. So I changed my strategy. Instead of trying to run away from these people and ignore them, I actually had lunch with them. I listened to them. And you know what I found? A lot of them just wanted to be heard.
Yes.
And respected. And when I heard them, I remember one guy, he was my fiercest opponent to the vision. And I finally took him out to lunch once. I took him out to lunch once. And I said, listen, I'm just going to shut up and let you tell me why this thing's not going to work.
Yeah.
And I'm going to listen to you. And so he just let it go, both guns. And I remember sitting there going, this guy is totally clueless. I mean, all his opinions here are not based on anything that has to do with fact. But I'm going to listen to him. So I listened to him. I didn't try and defend the vision or anything. I just tried to understand him and listen to him. Do you know, after that lunch, he became my greatest cheerleader.
I was just going to ask, have you had those experiences where those guys become your biggest advocates?
Yeah. And I don't think he agreed with me through the whole process, but what was hard to ignore was the finished product. I mean, when the campus got built and the church just exploded to 5,000 people, and it just became a healthy church, and he saw the blessing of God. He never came back to me. I don't think you should expect that, where your opponents come back to you and go, you were right. Yep. But, he stayed there. He loved it. He had his family there. And I think we were able to work on it together in some way. So I would have done it differently. I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning when I was young and foolish, but I would walk towards people who oppose you, and you may not be able to. Maybe they will never be on your team, but they should never be able to say you didn't listen to them and you didn't show them respect.
Yeah. What in that process of casting vision, like you said, it could be a 10, 20, 30, 40-year vision. What type of people do you need around you that can continue to help you grow, develop, ask good questions of yourself? How are my gauges? How am I doing? And are we on the right track? Are there characteristics, people you look for that can kind of be in the battle with you?
Yeah, it's almost the Jesus model. You have your 12, you have the multitudes, and then you have your inner circle. I mean, I had what I call my A team. That was my executive team, my leadership team, and those people have to have certain qualities. I never want to guess what they're thinking. They're people that tell me what they're thinking. They're loyal. They're loyal to the vision. They're loyal to the church. They're loyal to me. I never have to worry about my back. And we may not disagree. You don't want yes people all around you, but I never have to question their loyalty. I want them incredibly competent. I used to say all the time, I hire great people who are really talented and gifted and godly, and then I let them go. I get out of their way. And even though I may not agree the way they're doing it is not the way I would do it, if the final results are there that I want to see, I don't bother them. I want people who will play hurt. I want people who are passionate. Passionate people draw people around them because they're so stoked on what God could do here. What else? I want people who think big. That whenever they're thinking big, it's never a waste of time for them. Yes. So those are kind of the qualities I'm looking for in the A team. Then you're going to have B players, right? You're not going to have all A players. And those are very loyal people, and they're great, and they work hard. And you'll even have a couple of C players. They never bring too much to the bottom line, but you know what? They love the vision. They love God. And you know what? You need some C players there. Because everybody recognizes they're just servants. Boy, they serve their tails off. And so you'll have some D. I don't think you should have any Ds or E's or F's. None of those. Yep. But certainly you're going to have some A, B, and C players around you. And anybody knows this who's accomplished anything that's significant. Whenever a vision is accomplished, it's never about you or your great leadership. It's about the team of people, like you're saying, that was built around you that did it together. And then when you complete it, this I can tell you from experience now that I'm looking back, it's all about the relationships. It's all about the people you worked with and the times you remembered and the tough times and the times of faith. And
Yes.
that's what you remember. Yeah, it's great it's great to accomplish a great vision, right? But that's not really what's lasting. It's the relationships that were built.
Yeah. So you get to the end of the vision. You've climbed the mountain. You know, everyone knows what the top of the mountain looks like. I know you've talked about this, that there's a potential danger in living on that mountain too long, right? Yeah. And you can begin to see that decline on the backside of the mountain. How do you stop that? Even though you've conquered this big mountain, people might be tired. They're wanting to sit up there, and I know that's necessary for a while. How do you balance that tension, Dennis, to say, okay, what is the next hill? What are the things that we're seeing 10, 15 years out that we need to be working on now?
Yeah, that's hard because so much of the leader is wrapped up in the vision and the journey, how hard it is. And when you get there, when you arrive, when you see success, your tendency is to want to hold on to it and to really start to now be delusional that you think that the way you do things, how you've done things, is going to last forever. Meanwhile, society changes, all kinds of things change. And so the vision needs to look differently moving in the future. And that's usually a different leader. So the way you counteract the temptation to breathe your own exhaust and hold on to the vision too long is you need to learn about visionary leadership, particularly the bell curve, which is what you're talking about. You work hard, you get to the top of the mountain. That's vision accomplishment. Sometime just before vision accomplishment, you need to start talking about the next curve, the next vision. And that's what fortunately, I had a good training in visionary leadership. So about 10 years before we reached the peak, we started talking about succession and next vision. And I don't know what the next vision is because I'm not going to be that leader, but I did prepare the organization and the church to make the turn.
Yeah, because you wouldn't want the mountaintop to just be, hey, we've finished the building project, and the building is the thing that anchors us for the next 20 years, right? And then your church begins to slide on that decline. Right. And so that's stuff that I've learned from you and other leaders to be thinking about. Even though we're still in the initial vision, we need to be thinking about what that next mountain looks like, no matter who's in that chair, who's on the elder team, who's on the staff, because it changes, like you said. That stuff doesn't stay for the next 30, 40 years. That's a good word. And I think
I got good advice from that. I mean, I had one of the consultants we talked to said, if you're going to be involved in succession, you got to look back. You got to look to the next generation coming up because they have the new vision. It's going to be their generation. So we came up with really a 10-year plan on how to attract, empower, and encourage younger leaders. And so we stocked the place with young talent. When any position came up, we looked for younger leaders. And then the training on that has to be on the older leader side because we really don't know how to encourage and empower younger leaders. We think we do. So we had to get all our older leaders trained in that.
I want to ask you a question about that because a lot of churches now, I think I read on Barna the other day that over 80% of lead pastors are 66 years old and up in the United States.
That's a lot.
And so when you think of casting vision for the future, it's got to include, not just the millennials, but Gen Z and these two other generations that are coming up. How do you inspire the older generations, the boomers who are the builders and they're into retirement now? How do you get them to see that vision, taste that vision for themselves? Have you had any tricks or things that you could give us that would help in helping them see the vision for the church and what God wants to do through the
Yeah.
proclamation of the gospel?
Well, it's almost like when you're casting vision, uh, you have to spend a lot of time explaining why it's totally unacceptable for us to stay where we're at. A lot of people think about just casting the future. Well, that's
Yes.
true. But you want to talk about how it's totally unacceptable for us to stay where we are. You have to build that case. And so, likewise, when I was talking about succession with the congregation and with our staff, I said it's totally unacceptable for us to stay where we are. That's the first part. You have to convince older leaders that if they hold on to that leadership and they don't learn to empower and attract younger leaders, they will die along with their vision. Their vision's going to die eventually, and they'll die with their vision. And it'll be the book of Judges, it'll be the next generation was lost.
Yes.
So, number one, you have to convince them that it's absolutely necessary for us to do this. We have to learn how to empower the younger generation. And then, secondly, what we did was it's all about relationship at the end of the day. So we tried to get older leaders and younger leaders to spend time with one another on our staff. So I don't know if you were around when we were doing this, AJ.
Yep.
Were you around when we did this?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, we had a meeting once a month, I think it was, and I led it. And I would put 2 words on the board for each generation. For the older leaders, I would put empower. That's the goal. You want to empower, give away decision making, and encourage. And then the younger leaders, I would put respect and patience. You're not going to get all 5 keys to the cities right away. And you need to respect older leaders. And then I would set up the table so half the table were older leaders, half the table were younger leaders. And I just, I would put something on the board like, what do you think about this in the future? It wasn't important what the question was, but I wanted them to talk.
Right.
I wanted them to wanted the older leaders to see that, these younger leaders are pretty sharp. Not only that, they understand, they want to respect me. And then I want the younger leaders to see, boy, these older leaders have some wisdom.
Yeah, so you're mining for the younger leaders to feel comfortable to cast vision, right? To say, hey, this is what I'm feeling and sensing.
Yeah.
And you're training the older leaders to champion and absorb that without feeling like, man, I'm losing control of this thing that we built. And that's got to be a challenge. And I know we face it. I know all churches face it. It's not easy.
Well, I got very specific with my older leaders. Now, I said, listen, I'm not the only one that's going to be handing the baton here when I leave. All the older leaders, all the boomers are going to be doing this in every department. And I said, if you do it well, here's the carrot stick. If you do it well, you'll have a job here. You don't have to worry about your job. But if you don't do this well and you don't learn how to empower younger leaders, because that's our goal to transition this church over the next 10 years, the next generations, then you won't have a job here. So they had to straighten up and realize this is important stuff that the senior pastor wants to see happen in the church, a transition from older to younger.
Yes. No, that's really good. We're talking a lot about being visionary leaders in our church and in an organization, but we carry influence in our families, right?
Right.
In different spheres, whether it's hobbies or sports teams we're a part of. So I think everyone, to some extent, can cast vision to something that's healthy, beyond themselves, outside of themselves. And I would love to encourage Christians to believe that and own that. You don't have to necessarily be in a leadership, on paper, first chair position. As Christians, we're called to resemble Christ. And what advice would you have for just the guy, raising 3 kids and trying to be faithful to his wife? How would you encourage the mom who's doing her best and providing a safe place for her kids to grow up and flourish, or going out and starting a venture? How would you encourage them just in their daily lives as leaders?
I would say if God has put you in a place where you have influence over people, whether it's a mom, a dad, a supervisor, a ministry leader, He's going to give you a vision for what he wants, what the goal is, what he wants done with these people that you influence. It just makes sense. He's not going to call you to a place of influence and then not tell you what to do or how to do it. So I think for us, we complicate things. We think we have to have this big, elaborate vision to be a visionary. No. I have a book. There's lots of books I have written in my head. One of them is a book on vision, and it would be You Have Vision. If you're in a place of leadership, you can expect God to give you a picture of the future for the people that you influence. And I think every person, no matter what position they're in, if they're leading someone or leading something, you can expect God to give you a picture of what he wants done.
No, that's good. And as you rely on him, there's no age where that gets capped, right? Like
No.
you've been in pastoral ministry all these years, and you're still wrestling with what's the vision? Where should I be being used by God, and what's that next mountain or the wall that needs to be built? And I think that's just a cool thing. I think it speaks of our relationship personally with the Lord, and the fact that he's called us to something, to run the race well, to get across that line, maybe even exhausted, but with our tanks full.
Yeah.
If going back to a scenario, if you had another young leader who was tasked with casting vision, what are the top two things you'd tell them? Just first blush, you get 10 minutes with this guy.
Yeah.
What are the two nuggets you would give them?
First of all, I would say, look, it doesn't matter what the vision is if you're not a healthy leader. So at the end of the day, one of the things, our tagline on this new school we're trying to put up is soul first. The tagline is soul first, future ready. Yeah, we want to get people be able to be really solid students and believers in the future, whatever that looks like. But it's soul first. And if you don't take care of your soul and what's below the waterline, and really make sure your devotional life is solid, your walk with God is solid, your relationship, it doesn't really matter what kind of vision you accomplish. So I would say it's taking care of yourself first and your walk with God. And then secondly, I would say, if you're going to think about a vision, you have to understand what is reality right now. And I think organizations or ministries are in one of four categories when it talks about vision. They either have the right vision, and the vision going on right now is the right vision. Secondly, they don't have a clue on what vision is. Everybody's just scattered. A third category would be they have multiple visions. And a lot of companies and a lot of ministries are like that. You got a strong leader here and a strong leader here, and the church and the company is going in a bunch of different directions with all these little visions they got.
Yep.
Or they do have, the fourth category would be, we do have a vision right now, but it's the wrong one. Yeah. And that's why we're not succeeding. So I think I would say to a leader, make sure you're healthy enough to even lead a vision, and then do some assessment. Vision always begins with assessment. What's reality? What is life like right now? And then you can start thinking about where it needs to go.
No, that's really good. And I really appreciate you taking time with me today. I've got one really important question to ask you, though. How are your Giants doing, man? Are you
Okay, I think we ran out of time, didn't we, AJ?
Well, I had to ask you. I mean, that's
it's
here
it
blood
is.
a little
Here it
bit.
is. Giant fans live in Pain City right now.
Yeah, that's right. They need some wind vaccination really soon.
We need a new vision.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I appreciate you, man. I've valued your leadership and sitting under it, being at Alliance, and I know that you're going to continue to be that guy and inspire young leaders. And thank you for your time. Say hi to Judy and everybody.
Okay.
But we really appreciate you just jumping on the Valley Run podcast, and I'm sure you've added great value to young and older leaders looking at how do I continue to stay in the game and cast a vision that is healthy, future-oriented, while taking care of myself as a leader. So thanks for your time, brother.
Thank you for having me on, AJ. I believe in you, and it's always a pleasure to be with you.
Oh, man. Ditto. So God bless you, friend. Thank you.
Blessings.